This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. I am Chris Graham, going solo again here on a weekend, and we're getting ready for Sunday night. Virginia hosts NC State in ACC basketball action, and so I'm going to do a little preview of that game. We've got a couple of previews on the Augusta Free Press website if you want to check those out and get your rundown of this game. But we're doing here as well, and this NC State team, I noted in one of my game previews that Virginia is perhaps the hottest team in the ACC, the only unbeaten team left in ACC play at 4-0, 7-game winning streak overall. So they may be the hottest team in the ACC, except for this NC State team, which is coming off a pair of wins over top 25 opponents, including the win over number 19 Clemson on Thursday night, and of course last weekend's win over then number 2 Duke. And both those games in Raleigh, but the Pack, after losing their first two in ACC play, have the 2 wins over top 25 teams. Their third straight game against a top 25 team, obviously number 3 Virginia, coming up tomorrow night. And this NC State team is starting to come into its own, and I say that. It's also a team that owns a win over, at the time back in November, then number 2 Arizona. So a third game against a top 3 team already this season for NC State. Kevin Keatts in his first season, you might be familiar with Kevin Keatts, or at least that name. If you think about it, if you see him on the sidelines tomorrow night, if you're at the game, if you're on TV, you can say, that guy looks familiar. Yeah, he was the UNC Wilmington coach past few seasons, including last year when Virginia played Wilmington in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And, that was a very different UNC Wilmington team compared to what he has at NC State. At Wilmington, you're playing in the CAA. You don't get to recruit a lot of big guys. And so what you had last year for Wilmington, you had a small lineup, a 4-guard lineup, and really their center, if you want to call the center, was just 6'7". One guy over 6'7" got 2 minutes in the game. A very small lineup. Most of the action guys between 6 feet and 6'3". But they gave Virginia fits. If obviously, I'm sure you remember that if you're a Virginia fan listening to this. Virginia last year was down in that game 15 points with about 7:25 to go first half. Ended up taking a lead at halftime, had a 10-point lead late in the second half, and then Wilmington came all the way back out within 3 a couple times late before Virginia held on for a 76-71 win. And yeah, that number, that score is a high score for a Virginia team. That Wilmington team played to 70 possessions a game last year. That game only had 65 possessions in there, but Wilmington scored at a pretty effective clip, 1.09 points per possession in that game, a lot higher than Virginia's season average of .880, which was second in the nation. Wilmington really put some points on the board in that game. And so now Keatts, what he did last year so well, he pushed tempo again, though. Last year, over 70 possessions a game. This year, this NC State team, 72 possessions a game. And the Wilmington team last year with that small lineup spread the floor with 4 guards. Now State has a traditional size lineup now. When you move from the CAA to the ACC and you inherit a roster that generally looks like at least from a size standpoint, more like an NBA roster. And what Keatts has at his disposal this year, he has a front line that goes 7 feet, 6'8", 6'8", 166 player. But he still spreads the floor with that lineup. Omar Yurtseven is the 7-footer in this group, and he had 5 3-pointers made the other night in the win over Clemson. Now he only has he's made 11 on the season. He just had 6 going into that game, but clearly 5 of 6 from 3. He's got the range at 7 feet. He had 29 points in that win. He had 16 points in the win over Duke. And Yurtseven is just a sophomore, didn't play a lot last year, more down the stretch last year for that NC State team. But he's a guy that's really stepping into his own. And you'll also see going into the game at least the chance that Markel Johnson, the team's starting point guard when the season started this year, started the first 10 games for State. He may be back in the lineup. He's been cleared to return. Johnson went down, I think it was December 14th. I say went down. That sounds like he went down to an injury. He was actually suspended indefinitely after being arrested related to an incident in October in his native Ohio. He's a Cleveland native, and he was actually charged with a felony assault in an incident in October in Ohio. Those charges dropped, and so State has cleared him to return. I think he was on the bench Thursday night in that win over Clemson. He was not in dressed out. He was in street clothes, but he was on the bench with the team. And it was mentioned during that game broadcast that he may be back as early as this game Sunday night. I haven't seen anything online as of when I record this podcast right around noon on Saturday that gives anything definitive there, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't. And he averaged 8.7 points, 6.6 assists per game for this team this year in those first 10 games, which included that stretch where they had the win over Arizona. And so Johnson would add an element, a dimension to this NC State team. Of course, there's also the element, we know from Virginia seasons past, when you bring a guy back into the lineup after being out for a while, there is a awkward process of reacclimating him to that lineup. We remember from, 2014, 2015, the year that, I think that was the year Justin Anderson got hurt. That team started 19-0. They were 28-1. Anderson comes back late in the season, and the Cavs dropped 3 of their last 5 as Anderson was getting reacclimated in the lineup. It can be difficult those first few games back for a player, especially a starting point guard, a guy who has the ball in his hands an awful lot. You've kind of got a rhythm now if you're State, and now you gotta change things up. You bring a new guy in the lineup. That new guy either starts or he comes off the bench. Changes your rotations, changes your just kind of the way you substitute and everything else. And so those first couple games can be awkward, and so maybe that if he doesn't play tomorrow night, that may be the reason why. If you're Kevin Keatts, you may not want to bring Johnson back against a top-flight opponent like Virginia on the road in Charlottesville. You may want to save that return for perhaps a little friendlier game, maybe a home game. Maybe against a little bit lesser of an opponent, perhaps. So, not that there's anything easy in the ACC to say the least, but. This game is tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, and Virginia's got I know on paper you think, you look at NC State and you say, the Vegas betting lines have Virginia a double-digit favorite. KenPom.com has Virginia a 15-point favorite in this game. You're at home against a team that's young and very inconsistent. Before these 2 big wins over Duke and Clemson, there was a 30-point loss at Notre Dame. A team that just had lost Bonzie Colson probably for the season, and also was playing without Matt Farrell in that game. So this is a Jekyll and Hyde type team, this NC State team. But I look at this as it's going to be a challenge. State will of course try to push tempo. Everybody tries to push tempo in Virginia. This year's Virginia team 60.3 possessions per game. I mentioned NC State at 72 possessions per game, and Virginia, obviously when you play to 60 possessions a game, in North Carolina, a team that plays 74 possessions a game, only got 58 in that game in Charlottesville just last weekend. So that's it's a challenge obviously for anybody to try to push tempo. Even last year, Keatts in that game that Virginia won 76-71 over NC Wilmington. That game had 65 possessions per team in that game. So, even a team like Keatts' team last year that could push tempo couldn't do it against Virginia. But that will be there's always that battle when you play Virginia. Who establishes tempo? Who sets the pace as far as that goes? And if you're a tempo team, that you almost always end up playing Virginia's style of play. Can you beat Virginia at the way Virginia plays when Virginia plays that way every day and you don't? That's always a question. I think a big question in this game going in for Virginia is who guards Yurt 7. I mentioned the 7-footer. He's a guy that scores. He's now averaging 12.7 points a game. He shoots 60% from the field. I mentioned that the coming out party from 3-point range in this win over Clemson, 5 of 6 from 3-point range. But he shoots 60% from 2-point range, 60.6% from 2-point range, and so he's a tough guard. A guy like that, he can be dangerous on the perimeter. He's dangerous on those pick and pops, and he sets up in the post at 7 feet tall. He's got some abilities there across the board. So who guards him? Jack Salt, from the post perspective, would be the guy that you would think would guard, certainly get the bulk of the time guarding Yurt 7. But the idea of Salt, who's a very effective post defender, having to go out and chase a guy around on the perimeter, that's not quite Salt's game. But the other side of that is, do you try to go with Isaiah Wilkins, who can guard in the post and chase a guy around the perimeter at 6'7", but he gives up 5 inches to you at 7. So I think you end up seeing Salt probably get at least the initial assignment. You probably see some Mamadi Diakite at 6'9", also get some time spelling Salt when Salt needs to go to the bench. But it's going to be a challenge. And I think the other challenge Virginia then has is, of late, last 3 ACC games, you've seen the emergence really of DeAndre Hunter. Now, Hunter had some big games in the pre-ACC season, 3 double-digit games, including a 23-point outburst against Monmouth back in December. But really in ACC play since the Virginia Tech game, last 3, Hunter has been Virginia's one of their best scoring options in the last 3 games, averaging 13 points a game. He had 15 in the win over Syracuse, including 13 in the first half. And he's the third leading scorer on the team over those last 3 games, and a very close third. Kyle Guy averaging 14 a game, Devin Hall averaging 13.7. So you got DeAndre Hunter averaging 13 off the bench. You add him, you put Ty Jerome as a fourth scorer, if you want to say, a guy who had 31 in the ACC opening win over Boston College. You've got a pretty effective quartet there from a scoring standpoint. So you look at that group and you say, Hunter's obviously a very key guy in that group. Well, he's been getting a lot of those minutes, though. Hunter's a 6'7" guard, and I think when he's at his best down the line in his future of his career as a redshirt freshman this year, it'll be as a guard, probably as a 3, maybe a 2, but certainly Virginia plays a 3-guard system. And but he's been getting a lot of minutes at the 4 for this team as Virginia still, as Coach Tony Bennett still tries to figure out Jay Huff, another redshirt freshman. A lot of talent there in Huff, but still hasn't picked up the pack line defense quite to the level that Bennett would like. He feels a little uncomfortable putting Huff out there, the 7-footer, against these ACC opponents, given his issues picking up the pack line and in the post. It's important that particularly important that you know your roles. And so Hunter, who is a shutdown perimeter defender, has been getting a lot of minutes at the 4 defensively and then offensively as well. Well, now you've got a team in NC State. Not only you're at 7, but the front line for the pack is sizable. I mean, you got Abdul Malik Abu, who's 6'8", 240. Kenan Freeman, who is 6'8", 265. Hunter's a slight young man still, 6'7", but he's I don't know what he's listed at, but if he's 220, I'd be surprised. And just the idea of him matching up from a defensive standpoint against those bruisers for NC State on the inside might limit his minutes on the inside. And in the post, and as a result, right now the rotation, your 3 guards that start, obviously, Kyle Guy, Ty Jerome, Devin Hall, and your first guy off the bench is Nigel Johnson, and it's Hunter can play either role. He can come on the floor as a guard or as a forward, but it could change rotations. I'm not saying it will. It could change rotations for Virginia in this one, and if it does, either you lose a ball handler in Johnson, who's his backup role. He as a ball handler in a sort of a streaky scorer. Nigel Johnson, the Rutgers transfer, he's also had 20 plus in a game this year for Virginia. Or you limit the minutes of a guy like Hunter, who at 6'7" is a very effective guy. 3-point range, dribble drive ability, the ability to just hit that kind of curling off the screen and catching and shooting from 12 to 15 feet, that nice mid-range jumper. So that will be a challenge for Virginia, no question. As Coach Tony Bennett thinks through his game plan approach to this game. So the tip is 6 o'clock. We will have on Augusta Free Press. We'll live blog. We've already got our game preview. I've got a second column, kind of looking in depth at the Kevin Keats Tony Bennett matchup kind of looking at last year's UNC Wilmington UVA game and then extrapolating out to the two teams this year. So we'll have a live blog, and of course, Scott German will be joining me. We'll be courtside at John Paul Jones Arena. We'll do a post-game recap. We'll have a Facebook Live live rundown of the game and my Inside the Numbers column, etc. As we cover the UVA NC State game. And Virginia's fourth home game in the first 5 in the ACC, so obviously some makeup time coming up in terms of getting back on the road and getting some wins. But kind of I don't want to say a must-win for Virginia. I'll put it in a must-win category in this sense. The expectations for this team now, for me, they were high going into the season. I've been saying since the end of last season that you look ahead to this year's team. You had Jerome and Guy getting a year older, a year better. They would step up in their roles and share some of the offensive burden with Devin Hall. We've seen DeAndre Hunter emerge much more than I would have thought going into the season. Mamadi Diakite's really stepped up his game, I would say. Isaiah Wilkins and Hall have been very consistent and very good, and they've improved as well. Tony Bennett has an 8-man rotation that he just loves right now. I thought Jay Huff would offer more assistance to this group, and he still may. But going into the season, Virginia wasn't even ranked preseason top 25. Now number 3 in the country, and the only unbeaten team left in the ACC. You look at the KenPom.com projections. Actually has Virginia finishing 15-3 in the ACC, which you start thinking about those things too much, and it hurts your head if you're a Virginia fan. But this sort of is, you got to hold serve. You got to win these games against unranked foes in your gym, especially when, it's a chance to go 5-0 in the ACC after having 4 home games, because life on the road in the ACC is incredibly tough. And so if this Virginia team, which has now suddenly number 1 seed expectations, when you're top 3 in the country at a point in the season, there's really high expectations for the duration of the season, finishing and that kind of thing. So it sort of is a pressure game against a team in NC State that is coming in again. I mean, they've got their own things to build on here. They've, as a program now, these back-to-back wins over top 25 teams. They beat Arizona earlier this season. They win at Virginia. Would be really nice for the NC State NCAA tournament resume for Kevin Keats and his group in his first year with the program. So, big game for Virginia. Again, 6 o'clock tip. We'll be live blogging. And look forward to having. I'd love to hear from you during the game. Join us on the live blog. I report out, but I'd love to hear your input. We also tweet during the game, etc. So, if you have any questions, any observations, anything you want me to jump into, please, let's engage. So, let's wrap up for this Saturday. Let's get ready for some ACC basketball, some NFL playoffs, and tomorrow night, Virginia NC State. Until then. Have a great time.